One category of weapons that I don't see enough of in Tarkov are carbines, and for good reason too. The only benefit that some carbines have is that they have higher than usual starting ergonomics, and usually the recoil is pretty low because the semi-automatic weapons have hidden stats that make it that way. Otherwise, they usually always get outclassed by assault rifles, which have the fun switch. Going into your armor, and starting with your helmet, you do not get access to any helmets for the marksman class. The only form of head armor you get is the bomber beanie, a level 1 low ricochet chance armored beanie that probably won't, but maybe it could deflect a bullet for you. You can also get the tanker helmet, but this helmet blocks your headsets, so you can't get any hearing advantages, and it reduces your hearing, so ditto on that hearing disadvantage. You can also put on the condors, which are level 1 armored glasses, which are equally as effective as the beanie, meaning not very effective at all, but it's still better than nothing. For your body armor, you can go for anything that has a level 3 soft underarmor. For example, the Troopers is always a solid choice because it offers level 3 soft underarmor for your torso as well as your stomach. Theoretically, the Slick should also be a decent choice because if you take off the armored plates, it does show that it has level 3 soft underarmor for the back plate and the front plate. And since BSG added new armored rigs to the game, the Profi Stitch Mod 2 might be better than the Ars Arma Mod 1 because its true durability is a lot higher while covering the same places. So just to put it out there, if you want to try it out, it might just become your next favorite armored rig. But of course, if you want an old reliable, then you could always stick with the Mod 1. For the plate inserts, we go with the best level 4 we can get, the Kiba Titan, for the front and back plates. These are considered the best level 4 plates because the materials they're made out of, Titan, is a respectable 4th place out of 7 in terms of destructibility. This means that the true durability of the plate is 133 health, compared to the Noosphere tech, which is made of aluminum and has a true durability of 100. And then the Elafros is made of ceramic, the worst material in the game right next to glass, at 75 true durability. Lastly, for all of your utility, I cannot stress this enough, but every single person has a preference in how good something sounds. Testing the headsets individually in the shooting range won't work because you don't get a feel for how your opponents sound and the noises that accompany that kind of environment. So what I recommend is that you look at Tarkov Wiki for the headsets, sort by hearing range, and start with the best headset, which is the Comtac 6. Play a game with these headsets, and if they sound fine to you, that's great. You could just use the best headset as your main headphones, but if the headphones don't sound quite right, just keep making your way down the list and playing a game with each of the headsets until you find one that doesn't irritate your ears. If you aren't using an armored rig and you need to take a separate tactical rig, you can realistically take whatever rig you want. What I like to do is take something like the Profi MK2, which can cover my armored vest completely, or a large majority of it. The reason why I do this is because it's much easier for me to spot somebody if you can see their nearly single colored armor. So the rig just helps to break up that single colored mass and makes you harder to spot at distances. Your medical loadout can be a pretty standard heavy bleed stopping stim and a healing stim. In my case, I go with the AHF1, which will stop any type of bleed and prevent more of them from happening for the next 60 seconds. The ETGC will heal your health at 6.5 hit points a second for 60 seconds. So a total of 390 health gained over 60 seconds. Now realistically, you might not even see half of that, but 6.5 health every second is quite a lot. If you want to save some rating points, you can take out the stims and then trade them out for some extra bullets if you need it. Realistically, you will also probably be killed before you can use any of these stims because you're restricted to level 4 and below body armor. Now it's time to evaluate all of the different bullets. Starting off our list, the 9x39 caliber is in a pretty good spot. Maybe not in terms of balance, but the statistics on these bullets themselves are really good. Right now, SP6 is the highest we could go. Technically, there's a better bullet being the BP at 54 penetration, but that might never be added. In the main game, I don't think you could buy it. You could only find it in raids. all signs point to that they'll never be added for regular play. But just because it's second best, SP6 is no slouch either. At 48 penetration and 60 flesh, this thing can reliably penetrate level 5 armors, and also all of the weapons that fire 9x39 have really fast fire rates. Anything shooting this bullet could easily chew through level 6 armor reasonably fast as well. So ideally, you would always want to run SP6 if you can. I should also mention, for all 9x39 bullets, the bullet velocity is on the lower side, around 300 meters per second, so your bullets drop very quickly at longer distance. PAB 9 is by all rights also pretty good at 43 penetration and 62 flesh. It can basically do everything SP6 can do, but just slightly less reliable because of the 5 less penetration. This means that you might have to treat your weapon more like a headhunter because of the risk of facing off against enforcer players that might be using level 6 and level 5 armor. You don't have to, but you are opening yourself up to more risk if you try to body shot people with this bullet. The main pull for this bullet is that it's nearly half the price of SP6, so if you're strapped for rating points, PAB 9 is still a solid option. I'll kind of be treating SPP and SP5 the same, but not because of the stats. When you have PAB 9 and SP6, there's no real reason to go for an inferior bullet, even if it is that much cheaper. You'll be forced to aim for headshots, and they can't even reliably penetrate level 4 helmets on the first shot. You should try to make some compromises on your armor and your weapon build, and only when all else fails should you consider running SPP or SP5. Next up is 7.62x54R. No matter which one you choose, they all pack a nasty punch. Statistically, SMB would be the best choice because of 62 penetration and 75 flesh. But this also comes with appropriate debuffs because you can get a plus 10 recoil when you shoot this bullet. So if you have a weapon that can be modded and you could also put on a decent optic, then you should be going for the SNB. But if you're not confident in reliably hitting one-taps, maybe BT is a better choice. The BT bullet has 55 penetration and 78 flesh. This means that it can't easily penetrate level 6 armor, but after a couple of shots it will be able to. But usually this isn't even a problem anyways, because you'll still be aiming for headshots and upper body shots. And most of the time, people can't afford to run level 6 armor, so you'll be frequently facing up against level 5 and below armors, which BT can handle very easily. Another neat bonus with the BT is that it provides a -4 recoil, but also a -2% accuracy, which is just an extra 0.02 to your MOA. It's not that big of a deal either. If you have minimally modded weapons, like the SVT or the AVT, the BT bullet might be your go-to choice. The only positives of the LPS and PS are that they're much cheaper than SNB and BT, but the price for performance trade-off is not worth it. You can't easily penetrate level 5 armor anymore, and you get all the debuffs for no reward. -8 recoil and -5% accuracy. You can get more bullets, but you also won't be able to use all those bullets in most cases. For a semi-auto weapon, you might usually get through 1 mag, and maybe even 2 mags, so you should fill those few mags with the best performing bullets to make them count. As a side note, there is BSGS at 70 penetration, 72 flesh, but it's not in the game and is honestly kind of overtuned for level 7 armor, which doesn't even exist in Tarkov right now. The 5.56 caliber is kind of in an odd position for Carbines right now. The number 1 bullet is the SSA AP, which is not in the game and has 57 penetration and 38 flesh. It ironically wouldn't be very good for Carbines too. The reason is because it falls into the same problem as M995, the second best round at 53 penetration and 42 flesh. And that problem is flesh damage. In full auto assault rifles, this problem is less noticeable because a single bullet to the head can easily take out an opponent. But in a carbine where your fire rate is significantly lower, if you don't hit the headshot and you hit a thorax, it's more difficult to kill somebody through the thorax. You would technically need about 3 shots, so 42 times 2 is 84, which is 1 less than the 85 hit points of the thorax. But realistically, you'll also be hitting their arms, their stomach, maybe one ricochets off their helmet. In a realistic situation, I guess, you could put 4 or 5 bullets into a person, and they would not die because of the low flesh damage. This is the reason why a large number of people swear by the third best round, M855A1. This bullet has 44 penetration and 49 flesh. The penetration might look like a huge negative on paper, but in practice, it's actually barely noticeable. Generally speaking, people are running level 4 or 5 armors, so the M855A1 can punch through in the first shot and insta-kill to the head if the damage reduction isn't too bad. Going for body shots is still not ideal, but now you would only need 2 shots to get a kill. 49 by 2 is 98, which is more than enough for the 85 hit points. And in the scenario where your shots land in different spots, the bleed over from all that other damage might even allow for a one-shot. Anything below M855A1 really shouldn't be used because the penetration is low and the semi-auto nature already puts you at a disadvantage against fully automatics. M856A1 might work if you're only facing off against people with level 4 helmets and below, but you would have to be very good at face shots to make it consistently work, even when people are running around with Vulcan 5s. 545 is honestly in a much better place compared to 556. The BS round has 45 penetration and 54 flesh, so it can easily penetrate at M995 levels while also delivering more damage. So a theoretical thorax kill would only need 2 shots instead of the M995's 3 shots. BP is slightly worse at 45 penetration and 48 flesh, but of course it is cheaper. However, in all of my testing, I never once had any trouble with getting enough rating points, so if you really are scraping as many rating points as you can, it might be worthwhile to use BP instead of BS. Anything below BP is definitely not worth considering, because 7N40, for example, the next down, is slightly worse for only 5 rating points less per bullet. The savings is just not worth the performance cut. And flesh damage rounds are just not viable because it's even hard to leg meta quickly in full auto, let alone semi-auto. Also, for the main game players, Igolnik is technically the best at 62 penetration and 37 flesh, but you should avoid using this with Carbines. The flesh damage is so low that even headshots will not kill in one shot. The damage reduction will usually be enough to shave off 3 hit points, meaning the head is often left at single-digit numbers, leaving you open for a kill. 762x51 is basically a mirror reflection of 762x54. M61s should be your go-to round because it offers reliable level 6 penetration at 64 pen and 70 flesh damage. There is a recoil price to pay of plus 10 additional recoil, and it's 3 times the cost of the second place, which is M62s. M62s are not comparable, however, to BTs because it only offers 44 penetration. It's not going to be as reliable as BTs or M61s, so you really want to be aiming for headshots because it could struggle a little with level 5 and level 6 armors. Anything below this is not worth considering because they're not that much cheaper than M62s and they don't perform on the same level either. For 762x39, BP is what you want to go with. At 47 penetration and 58 flesh, it sometimes won't penetrate level 5s in the first shot, but 47 is high enough along on the 40 to 50 range that we can assume it's a 70% chance that it'll penetrate a level 5 armor in the first shot. TPM below is just not worth using because it's only 20 rating points less than BP, so the savings are not that great. And at 41 penetration, although not that common, it's not unusual to see a level 4 helmet bounce a PP bullet, which you probably might have hoped was a one-tap. And last but not least, .366. You should never use EKO at 30 penetration because it's just not good enough in semi-auto. Even if you hit those headshots, a high ricochet chance level 3 helmet can easily bounce an EKO. Surprisingly, at 35 extra recoil, the APs don't seem to affect your recoil at all. In practice, this round is borderline broken because at 42 penetration and 90 flesh, you could potentially one-tap a person through the thorax. And this is pretty common because of how popular the Scout and the Marksman classes are with their level 4 armor limitations. And even if you can't one-tap a person, 90 flesh damage is powerful enough to where if it does hit your opponent, they'll be severely injured anyways. I also want to emphasize, because of how low the recoil is, and therefore how easy it is to get your builds to very high ergonomics for carbines, you can actually put on a long-range variable optic to make getting headshots much easier. And also, your magazine capacity is limited to 20 rounders. So for the SKS, for example, you will not get access to 75 round drums. Now that we're getting into the weapons, let's start with the VSK. The VSK is one of the only carbines that have a full auto option, so if you need to, you could flip it on and give yourself a better chance to secure a kill. But this is where the positives really end for the VSK, because you can't mod this weapon very much at all. You can only put on a suppressor, a sight, and a tactical device. If you put on the suppressor, it makes your gun pretty long, so there have been a few times where I've been barrel stuffed, so keep that in mind if you do want to use it. It's also not very accurate with 4.37 MOA. For reference, the TX-15 has a 1.4 MOA, which is around the average. This next bit of information is not really a negative, but I think it's important to mention nonetheless. The fire rate is a lot slower than other 9x39 weapons. It has 700 RPM. As for reference, something like the AS Val or the VSS has 900 RPM. It's by no means slow, but it could still get outpaced by Vectors and other faster firing SMGs. The overall experience, I'd say, with the VSK is that you're mostly carried by your good bullets, but the platform itself is leaning more towards a bad weapon. But if you're looking for efficiency, you might as well go with something like the SR3M. The AVT, in my opinion, is just a worse SVT. I'm going to evaluate both of them because they're almost exactly the same. The only two differences are that the AVT has a full auto mode and it has 3 less ergonomics than the SVT. The full auto mode is fun, but it encourages wasting bullets. The recoil is already insanely high, so trying to full auto at any distance aside from kissing range is not a good idea. If you do want to go full auto, you should probably consider BTs because they do give that -4 recoil bonus. The -3 ergo is just the cherry on top, making aiming with the already hard to see iron sights even harder to do. I think for what they offer, they're both pretty reliable weapons. It's hard to go wrong with 7.62x54, it's just that the optics situation is something I don't really like to compromise on. I'm going to treat the ADAR and the TX-15 as the same weapon as well. They're both 5.56 semi-auto carbines that can easily be taken to very high ergonomics. The ADAR barely has any recoil, especially when fully modded. The modding is one of the best because you could change the handguards, stocks, foregrips, basically whatever you want. I really recommend going for a 100 ergo build so that you can take advantage of that variable scope that I was talking about. It will help you acquire your targets faster than someone just using a 1x laser or reflex sight. I really have nothing negative to say about the ADAR, so this section is going to be a little bit short, but you just need to know that the bullets are not as good as the 7.62s, so it might take a little bit more getting used to. For this next part, I'll also be treating the SAG Short and the SAG Carbine the same because they both perform nearly identically. You start with a very high ergonomics for both of them, so getting to that 100 level ergonomics is really easy to do. The only thing you have to do now is slap on a variable optic and just let the premium bullets do the rest. And although the modding is not as good as the ADAR, it can still let you change a multitude of different parts, like stocks, foregrips, and the pistol grip. The fire rate is technically also slower than the ADAR, 650 compared to the 800. It's hardly noticeable, but still there, so basically it's a non-issue. For performance, I would prefer this over the ADAR because the bullets just are a little more consistent. But in terms of appearance, I have to agree, the SAG does leave a little more to be desired. The Vepr Hunter, what used to be known as the Rat Cannon, has fallen from grace, but clawed its way back up to, I'd say, a pretty respectable position. First and foremost, despite what the numbers say, the recoil is actually pretty good. There's effectively no worthwhile modding that could be done, aside from adding a sight and a suppressor, and the suppressor is debatably not worth using because it takes away so much of your ergonomics. There's no practical reason to take the suppressor because the recoil is already good enough, and the extra length makes the barrel stuffing even easier to do to you. If you want to use a tactical device, be careful too, because it could end up taking half of your screen like you're probably seeing in this background footage. To counter that, I recommend using something like the Hydra and just putting it on top so it only takes a fourth of the screen. You are also limited to 10 or 5 round magazines, so you really have to make your bullets count lest you risk the chance of getting pushed while reloading. The overall evaluation of the Vepr is that it could be worse. With M61s, it's usually pretty easy to get a positive KD, but there are better performing and more fun 7.62x51 platforms, so the real question is, why bother? The VPO-136, which is the 7.62x39 semi-auto AK. The modding capacity is quite high because you could swap out any parts that you want. Stats-wise, it is also very comparable to all the other carbines. 55 base ergo makes it easy to get high ergonomics, and recoil is very low because of the hidden stats given to semi-autos. The fire rate is a lot slower than the previous weapons because it's only a little noticeable when spam firing, which hopefully you won't be doing too much of that often. If you want a good and reliable semi-auto weapon, you definitely can't go wrong with a nicely modded VPO-136 with BPs. The SKS recently got a lot of love from BSG in terms of new attachments and a restyling as well, and it still is as reliable as it always was. You need to level up the SKS in order to make it really good, but what you get in the beginning is still decent enough to get a positive KD with some good bullets. Some interesting features is that the only chassis that lets you put on a foregrip is the Tapco chassis. Also, you can top load the SKS, so technically you would only need one magazine. It is a slow process to top load, so it's not really recommended that you go this route. As long as you aren't running the SKS in its stock configuration, any build of the SKS should serve you pretty well. The RFB is an interesting little carbine because it is the only one in the bullpup style. Unfortunately, that also means that modding options are limited. You could put on the typical sight foregrips and muzzle devices, but if you want a tactical device, you are forced to use the Hydra sight mount. The ergonomics can't go nearly as high as the SAG or the ADAR, starting at 49 ergonomics. Using scopes is a little bit less feasible, but still definitely possible. You could go for the strictly ADS route and rarely ever hip fire, but in that situation, if you do ever have to hip fire, you will likely be very inaccurate. Overall, I'd say the RFB is honestly not too bad. The recoil is low, the bullets are good. The only problem is that in order to get the most important part of your weapon's kit, a tactical device, you need to use the Hydra, which adds an insane height over bore. The VPO 209 and .366 is incredibly underrated right now. With all the changes that BSG have made to it, the recoil isn't even really a problem anymore. You can also mod it like any other AK, so you can get the ergonomics whilst also benefiting from recoil reduction as well. The shining jewel of 366, however, is its insane one-tap potential in Arena specifically. You might only see it a couple times in the footage that I show you, but I do sometimes one-tap people through the thorax. With 90 flesh damage, if you are lucky, even with the damage reduction, it can one-tap through level 4 body armor. Also, if you could hit the armor gaps and hit the armpits, for example, you could one-tap the thorax that way as well. If you haven't given the VPO 209 a try, you might just be surprised by how well it can perform. So maybe try out the build that I'm using, let me know how well it went for you. Next up are assault carbines. Since it also has carbines in the name, I have also lumped them into this video as well. The VSK and the 9A91 look pretty similar, but they're statistically different. If you give both weapons the exact same parts, the NA91 is inferior in every single aspect compared to the VSK. So therefore, there's not really much to say about the 9A91. Although the numbers say that it's technically worse, it feels exactly the same as the VSK. So if you ever need a refresher on the VSK, you could just click the timestamp to take you back. Lastly, the SR3M. It's one of the newer additions in the .15 wipe and is actually different in a good way too. It has really good starting stats, which is good because you can't do much modding to this weapon. Whatever you do to it will have minimal effects. Another positive is that it has a high fire rate at 900 RPM, so it's at that same fire rate level as the AS-Val and the VSS. The only negative that I'd say it has is that it has a high MOA of 5.02, which is pretty comparable to SMGs. So if you're fine with SMGs, I guess you'll be fine with the SR3M as well. This also shouldn't be too much of a problem because usually you're going to be in medium to short range fights, and the full auto option is available, so when bullets are coming out at 900 RPM, accuracy doesn't really matter anymore. I also forgot to mention this for the other 9x39 platforms, but the muzzle velocity is very low for the SR3M at 290 meters per second. So what that means is that if you like playing air pit or sawmill, the arc of the bullet might drop off really quickly. But that's all for today. I hope you learned something new, or at least had some of your own opinions validated. BSG might add a few more weapons in the next wipe, so I might have to make a shorter companion video to cover anything new that gets added. But otherwise, thanks again for watching, and take care.